Buongiorno! Let's sit down and go over another set of questions that I received for Consult the Doctor. I have two very pragmatic pen questions, and then I have two slightly more philosophical questions. So I'll do the pen questions first, and then I think those are for the most general audience, and then we'll move to more philosophical stuff. Okay. Question 1. What is the crispest italic nib? I find that a difficult question to answer because there are so many different nib options out there. I do think that generally speaking, it is true that many of the nibs that you buy, and when I say buy, I do mean nibs that you buy sort of off the shelf without having them ground by a nibmeister or something, tend to be more stub-like than truly italic. So in other words, the tipping has slightly more rounded edges. And the reason for that is that they are more easy to use. A true crisp italic nib would have corners that truly are something like this, and that makes for maximum line variation. If you would have those corners more rounded off, you'd have less line variation, but the experience is smoother and the sharp corners won't dig into the paper. But I'm assuming that you had drawn that conclusion too, and that's probably why you asked the question. I have found that Aurora nibs, I do seem to recall using one Aurora Italic, and I don't remember that pen that was on, but if you look at my website, the review index, and you look at the Auroras, you should be able to find the one that had an italic nib, because I did review that pen. That was very crisp. Another nib that I remember that was of a pen in my personal collection was on the Conway Stewart Model 100, and that is a review you certainly can look back at, and it really is looking back. That is a very old review, so the video quality is probably not great. That was a very, very crisp nib, and I distinctly remember that was an italic medium, that the tipping on that nib really was square. There was almost no rounding off to the tips, to the corners of the nib. That did have some issues, but once Mike Marciama fixed them, the first time I was in DC, the DC Pen Show in 2012, a pen wrote very, very nicely, but that was very crisp. Those are the two brands that come to mind for me, and that's pretty much it, because a lot of I find stock Jowo nibs that a lot of companies use these days. You can get a 1.1 or 1.3, but they are really more stubs than that they are true italic nibs. If you want to learn more about different kinds of nibs, I do have a video called On Specialty Nibs, where I go into the differences of what the differences are. Italic, stub, oblique, etc. Okay. Next, quick question, and this for me is kind of like question B to this. What is the difference between an italic nib and an oblique nib? I got a question from a gentleman who asked about this, and I think it's a relevant question. Now, I'm doing a very quick drawing here. The difference, I want to keep this a little short, but the difference is this. What you see here, this would be a true italic nib, so that's obviously a schematic, but that's about italic, so very crisp corners. Now, oblique nibs, as you can see, are ground at an angle, hence oblique. And that only makes sense if when you write with a pen, you rotate your hand slightly as you write. Then there is what Richard Binder calls a left foot and a right foot oblique. Look at your feet, and then you will see what he means by that. Look at the toes, right? Left foot, right foot oblique. And those are better for specific handedness. I always have to think about this. The left foot oblique is good for right-handed people, and the right foot oblique is good for left-handed people, depending on how that nib slants. So that was a very quick bonus answer. Again, much more information about that in that video on specialty nibs. Okay, the next question. I compress this question a little bit, but it comes down to, are you aware of any other pens made from diffusion-bonded acrylic? And if not, are there any pens similar? Now, to give a little bit more context, What is really being asked here, what was referred to was this pen, the classic pens LM1. This is a diffusion-bonded acrylic. Also have an LB5, same material. There are 6 colors of these, and here's an LB6. This is a very attractive material. Now, the thing to do here for me was the following. Open the Fountain Pens of Japan book by Andreas Lambrou. After all, the Andreas Lambrou is behind the making of the pens you just saw. I'm going to read from you page 424 because we first need to define for ourselves what exactly diffusion-bonded acrylic is. Carville, an English engineering company established in 1928, leads the field in diffusion-bonded acrylic materials. Its diffusion-bonded manifolds are used in medical diagnostics, clinical chemistry, and biotechnology. Carville's work on diffusion-bonded acrylics entails several processes in the preparation of the acrylic sheets, including the removal of the longitudinal stress that causes acrylic pen parts to shrink during a pen's life. The treated acrylic sheets are then bonded together through diffusion and cut to rods of about 500 millimeters in length. The girth is specified by the customer. Some pen makers, in particular Parker, have worked with Carville to produce special editions with such materials. So there is the answer to the first part of your question. Yes, there are other manufacturers who have used diffusion-bonded acrylic. Classic, that is Classic Pens, worked with Carville in 2006 and created 2 exclusive diffusion-bonded acrylics which form the basis of its LM1 Flame Red and LB3 Jupiter series. Jupiter is based on the Space Blue material, blah blah blah. In 2012, Classic and Carville worked together again to create specific designs using 2 or more different acrylic products. The bonded acrylic patterns made by using state-of-the-art technology result not only in attractive and very stable fountain pens, but also in designs that have significance in nature or Japanese culture. Classic and Sailor work together to customize the majestic King Prophet fountain pen. Examples of the artist's rendition are given below. I'm not going to show you that because I don't want to waste more time than is absolutely necessary. So again, in order of appearance, here was that LM1, okay, in flame red. Here is that LB5 he was talking about. That is a special version of the King Prophet, just a little bit longer than the regular King Prophet. And here we have something hand carved by Paul Rossi, which is difficult to see, but it's actually faceted. Can you see that? This way I think you can. Okay, so I think that answers your first question. There are other companies that use diffusion-bonded acrylic. Now, why is this such a big deal? Simply because it's an attractive material. Now, I think, and I say this with all due respect, I don't mean anything biased, I think the real question is there a cheaper way to get pens made out of diffusion-bonded acrylic? Because the pens I've just shown you are not cheap. And the answer to that question, as far as I can tell, is no. I do not know of any manufacturers who use that diffusion-bonded acrylic in pens that cost $50 or something. And that's a shame, because it's an attractive material. However, having said that, I do want to say the following. I remember the very wise words of Paul Rutte, the recently retired store manager of Akkerman in The Hague, who, when we once asked him, "But what about Omar's turquoise? It's such a pretty color. What if it is discontinued?" He smiled and he said, "Then there will be another ink." And he was absolutely right. You don't have to have that diffusion-bonded acrylic to have an attractive red pen. Montegrappa has made a very attractive red pen. I don't have the model at the top of my head, and I'm sorry. I don't have it, but look around, shop around. There are so many wonderful people who make nice acrylics these days. You don't have to go for celluloid. You can just go for an acrylic. I bet if you really want a very attractive bright red pen and you contact Jonathan Brooks of the Carolina Pen Company and you say, "Jonathan, pour me a bright red swirly acrylic, as bright red as you can," he will do that for you. You will pay for his time, for the material, of course. Someone also has to turn that rod into a pen, but he'll be able to do it, and there are other people too. So if it is not a Classic Pens or a Lambrou Pens diffusion-bonded acrylic red pen, there will be others, and that's perfectly fine. There are other beautiful red pens. So don't be discouraged. I hope that was positive and inspiring. Speaking of that, I got this question. What is your sort of favorite? I'm sorry, I'm dropping this, making a lot of noise. I'm so sorry. What's your favorite / most inspiring quote? Well, there are a lot of quotes, and it's tempting to now get to some sort of stoic quote from some stoic author. But I thought I'd do something a little different because we already have the Stoic series, and the Stoicism is going to come up in the next question anyway. I recently watched one of the 2 addresses of Marco Pierre White. If you don't know Marco Pierre White, he was at the time the youngest chef in the UK to get 3 Michelin stars. A famous chef. In some ways, some people consider him the first celebrity chef. He was the one who taught Gordon Ramsay, and legend has it made Gordon Ramsay cry, so you can kind of picture his personality. But he has a beautiful storytelling voice and a wonderful way, and he has the Cambridge address and the Oxford address. Both are on YouTube. You can watch them for free. His autobiography, by the way, is also very interesting to read, and it's interesting that he can reproduce that pretty much verbatim in those addresses. Anyway, he said something during one or two that I found very interesting. He said, the secret to everything in life is discipline. And that is a quote that I have found very inspiring. When you say something like that in such a black and white manner, when you use absolutes like everything, then of course there are exceptions. That's too black and white. But when you think about it, I think he raised a very good point. When you want to accomplish something, whatever that is, if that is whether it's a career thing or a relationship goal or having a YouTube channel, whatever it is you want to do, if you want to be good at something, then you have to have discipline. You have to invest time. Making these videos takes a lot of time, but I'm now 11 years in, and tens of thousands of subscribers into this. But that did not come from me doing nothing. That came from me investing a lot of time in making videos, trying to come up with interesting topics, not just reviews, but other things as well. And that's discipline. The same thing I can say for my career, just professional life. I work in academia, and that's hard. It's hard to get a place in academia. Carving that out is very hard. It may depend a little bit on what specific field you're in, but in my field it's not easy. But I did it, and this is not me bragging. This is a matter of that did not happen. That did not just materialize out of thin air. That happened because I've been disciplined. I've worked hard for a very long time, trying to stay in the picture, trying to be noticed by the right people, and that worked out. So I think he was right, and he describes this very well in the context of himself and obtaining his first Michelin star, and then the second, and then the third, and he wanted to get to the very, very top of what he was doing, and how incredibly difficult it was. Now he was doing like multiple hours. If you think an 8-hour workday is long, he was doing 14 hours, 18 hours, right? Every day to get to where he was, and where he ended up. And he was successful. The flip side to that is there were many sacrifices. He's been married multiple times and all kinds of things, but that's the discipline. But I thought that was a very interesting one. The secret to everything in life is discipline. I think it's something that we often forget. I think a lot of people these days kind of feel that the world owes them all sorts of things, but that's not the case. You do not get to a good position in life by basically doing half-assed work. It just doesn't work that way. Right? It's discipline. Alright. Now the following final question was a fairly lengthy one, and for good reason, but I don't want to read you the entire email. Summarizing it, basically it said, I have a pen, which is a special version of the King of Pen. I love it. It's very pleasant to use. But I've now found out that this model of King of Pen was made especially for veterans in Japan. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. For Japanese veterans who could not be given a state pension because they were not in Japan. Well, that That could mean all sorts of things, but the examples that the person who wrote me the email used could be that person has been a prisoner of war. It could also be that that person has collaborated with another nation to not be tried for any possible war crimes they've committed, something like that. So in other words, the question was, how do I deal with this? I now have a pen that in principle I love, but that has actually come out of potentially pretty bad things. And I think it was a very interesting question, and it took me multiple weeks to think about this, to come up with an answer. And I think I want to be very nuanced in this. I think the simplest way to look at it is you separate the art from the artist, which is something we do. Not every artist has been great. We think of someone like Wagner, right? Difficult anti-Semitism, like all kinds of things have been in his life, and then the Nazis chose to use his music. Well, that was not really his fault, I would say, but in any case, he himself, as from what I remember, had some anti-Semitic sympathies. So what you can then do is say, well, I separate the art from the artist. Like, well, that man in this case was bad, but the music is still nice, so I can appreciate the music, for example. He's not really my composer, but that's besides the point. So there's that. However, I do think that at some point that type of reasoning breaks down. For example, I once beheld, did not hold, but beheld a Mont Blanc, which instead of the famous Mont Blanc logo, on the finial of the cap had a swastika. And when I asked the person who had that with him, who cannot be named, I mean, actually like swore me to secrecy, when I asked him, is that what I think it is? He said, yeah, this is a Mont Blanc that was made for the Nazis, for Nazi leadership. They commissioned this and Mont Blanc made it. And he said, I'm not supposed to have this. That's why I can't mention him. I can't mention his name. Now, at that point, things become a little bit more complicated. Because now you can say, well, you can separate the art from the artist. I mean, the Nazis are bad, but it's just a pen. But it's a little more than just a pen, isn't it? That has a symbol on it. We can now say, oh, but in ancient India, that was a symbol of peace. Yeah, but it was not used in that context, was it? That argument doesn't hold. It's not just a symbol of peace. It was used in a very specific way by the Nazis, and that is a Nazi object. So then I think it becomes a lot harder. And for the record, let me emphasize this. The person who had this pen was not a Nazi sympathizer. There was another reason he had it. Again, sorry, I can't say more on that. So then that reasoning, now you're separating the art from the artist, that no longer holds. I don't think you can make that argument. You can't say, well, that's okay. It's okay, it's just a pen. It's a wonderful pen. Appreciate it for what it is. Has such a nice nib. I didn't go so far as to ask if there was a special imprint on the nib too, which it's possible there may have been, right? I don't know. So you see here the complexity of the question that was asked. I don't know. What do you do? And I can certainly see that if you have negative feelings about the pen now, which I certainly understand you would, maybe you can't keep it. I mean, you could keep it and not use it, but then what's the point? The issue here was that apparently it's a very nice pen that writes very nicely. So what I thought, the final thing I would say about that is I can tell you what I would do. But that's then a purely subjective statement. I would probably get rid of it. Maybe reach out, I might go so far, to reach out to some sort of war museum, explain the situation, say, look, this is what I have. I don't want much. Maybe I want nothing. At this point, it's kind of ruined for me. But get rid of it that way. Because I can't look at this pen and not have negative associations for whatever reasons that may be, and that could be rightly or wrongly, right? I mean, you could debate how bad this is, but I don't want to get into all of that. This person finds this pen now has negative connotations for him. In that case, I probably would get rid of it, because then you also get rid of those connotations for yourself and you have that peace of mind. Because I don't think I'd be able to enjoy that pen for what it is, just a pen at the end of the day, if I know that that was the whole history behind it. What would you do in this situation? Can you separate the art from the artist in that case? Can you use the pen? This is, I think, truly a question in the field of ethics, and I don't think there is necessarily a right or wrong answer here. It's not that this pen was, let's say, stolen from a Jewish population that was then put in concentration camps. Then I think the story, then to me the story would be very different. But it's not that, it's a different thing. What do you do? What would you do? Tell me that. Leave me a comment. I would appreciate it, because I find it a very complicated question. Alright. Hope this was useful. If you want to look into the history of that, I think it was a King of Pen minister. I think that's what they're called. Hope this was useful. Hope I haven't rambled incoherently. Probably have, because it's what I do. But that's it. Any other questions you want me to cover, consult the doctor. Please leave them below and leave me comments on what you would do with that, with the difficult pen. Let's call it that. Hope this was useful, and I'm glad to see you later. Bye bye.